Hi, everyone. I'm Jean Chatsky. Thanks so much for joining me today on HerMoney. At some point in our lives, many of us experience a wake-up call about whether we're really going in the right direction. Sometimes it's brought on us by some sort of sudden life event. We lose a job. We go through an illness. Sometimes it comes out of taking a pause and thinking about nothing. My best ideas tend to come when I'm on a run or in the shower, go figure. And sometimes it's a collective experience. Something so momentous happens that millions of people decide to completely change the trajectory of their lives. Something like, I don't know, a pandemic, which we are still feeling the effects of 3 years later. Joanne Lipman, the former editor-in-chief of USA Today and the Wall Street Journal's Weekend Journal, was one of those millions of people. In April of 2020, which, if you remember, was a time when everyone thought the pandemic would just last a couple more months, Joanne woke up one day and predicted correctly that the pandemic would completely upend our professional lives. She realized that we were not going to be okay with going back to the status quo of working as we had done for years. So she set out to create a guidebook that would help us figure out the steps that we should take to transition careers, start businesses, and make many other kinds of major pivots. Fast forward to today, and yes, Joanne's prediction turned out to be true. We had the Great Resignation, the still resilient labor market. Both of those things combined have made it clear that workers have a lot more power than they used to when it comes to deciding what they want to do with their lives and how they want to do it. And if you're one of those workers who's had a wake-up call and wants to make a big change, Joanne's got a new book out now to help you find that renewed sense of purpose. It's called Next, the Power of Reinvention in Life and Work. We're going to dig into it today. Joanne is also an on-air contributor at CNBC, a journalism lecturer at Yale, and the author of several other great books, including That's What She Said, What Men Need to Know and Women Need to Tell Them About Working Together. Joanne, welcome. Always so good to see you.
Jean, it's so good to be here with you. Thanks.
So you started, as I said, this book at the beginning of the pandemic, the very beginning of the pandemic. And now we're 3 years down the road. I can't even believe that. Where do you think people are with their relationships to work?
Yeah, it's so interesting, Jean. So Next, as you mentioned, what Next is, it's a deeply reported guide to navigating change in how we live, how we work, how we lead. And as you mentioned, I did write it for this moment in time because we are still in search for that new normal. It's really interesting because 3 years after the pandemic, luckily that health crisis has receded, but that search for more meaning, for more purpose in what we do seems actually more urgent than it ever was even before.
Do you think that's because the pandemic just sort of shook us to our cores in some way and made us realize that all life is kind of borrowed?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if you think about it, it pulled us out of our routine, the pandemic. And what that did is it gave us that moment of reflection to start reprioritizing our lives, to start rethinking how we did our jobs, but also our very relationship to our jobs. And so as a result, when you're sort of rethinking in that way, you're saying, is this how I want to live my life? And can I live it differently? And also, when you think about so many knowledge workers who were sent home and suddenly had a different kind of tempo to their lives, and they realized there was a way to integrate their lives and their work in a way that they had never done before. And that opened our eyes to say, you know what, there is a different way. We actually do want to think about how do we reinvent the workplace, but also kind of reinvent our lives. Like, how are we going about living and what are we prioritizing and how are we spending our time?
I've heard it described that prior to the pandemic, many people lived to work, and now that's been flipped. More people are working to live or working to support the lives that they want? Or do you think it's just somewhere in between?
No, I absolutely agree with you. People are rethinking how work fits into their life instead of how life fits into their work. And that is a reversal. And that's something that companies are dealing with right now. A lot of companies are trying to bring people back. A lot of them are saying you got to come back 5 days a week. They're getting a lot of pushback. We're seeing it with younger workers. And by the way, I'm sure you've hit on this before, but with each succeeding generation, people spend less time in their each job. So if you look at millennials, it's 2 years and 9 months. If you look at Gen Zers entering the workplace, it's 2 years and 3 months. And so there is this opportunity for people to rethink and reinvent their careers and to do it multiple times in the course of their life, because particularly these younger workers who are coming in now, unlike those of us who came in several decades ago, a few decades ago, there was always this assumption a career is a 40-year path to you get to 65 and you retire. People coming into the workforce now are looking at something that is probably more like a 60-year career path. And so you combine that with this shorter period of time that they're spending in each job, and you have multiple opportunities for reinvention. And that really was one of the inspirations for me writing next was this idea, there really isn't a guidebook for this. And we do need to figure out how do we get from here to there? And are there strategies that can get us from here to there? And that was the background of the book. I did interview hundreds of people who have gone through transitions of all sorts. And then I also spoke to experts in the process of change, everyone from management theorists to psychologists to neuroscientists who study what happens inside your brain when you have those aha moments like you were just talking about.
Well, we're going to dig into all that. But before I get to the tactics, and I think you know me well enough to know that I like the tactics. I like a recipe. I like a roadmap. I like solutions for how to get from A to B to Z. But before we do that, how do you know if you're ready, right? Change is scary. Pivoting is daunting. How do you get the sense that you're ready to make a change?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. I have a whole chapter on how do you know when to make the leap. And one of the things I looked into was gut feeling. And actually, it turns out that gut feeling is frequently correct, which I was happy to hear about because I tend to go by my own gut feeling. I was glad to be validated. But the reason that it tends to be correct is because it actually doesn't come out of nowhere. Gut feeling is literally kind of a physical feeling. It's where your body gets there before your brain does. And the reason that generally happens is because it's actually a form of pattern recognition. It is something that you have some experience with, that you have knowledge about, but your body understands this before your brain rationally puts it together. So gut feeling is one thing. But what I found with the people, and I spoke to people who had the most amazing reinventions, the guy who started out as a JP Morgan economist and is now a cattle farmer, or the telephone repairman who's now a women's shoe designer. And when I talked to them about their pivots, it turns out for them and for almost everyone I spoke to, that we generally are actually more ready to pivot than we realize. By the time we consciously get to that point where we say, I want to make this move, we generally have started, we are well on our way there, generally in ways that we maybe didn't intentionally realize, right? Like a side hustle, a hobby, a random interest. So the most successful pivoters were not people who just dropped one identity suddenly and then said, I'm going to adopt another, right? It's not like today I'm a journalist, tomorrow I'm going to be an astronaut. It does not work like that. But what does work is this organic change, organic. So most of the people I spoke to were starting to inch along toward wherever they were moving. And they generally started on that path before they were consciously aware of it.
It's fascinating. And I think intuition is such a misunderstood discipline. I mean, you're right. I've read a lot about it, and it's patterns that you've seen through your life that your brain doesn't quite understand that you've seen throughout your life. One person actually said, if you're not sure what your gut is telling you, the thing to do is to flip a coin. And that while the coin is up in the air, you will wish that it goes one way or another. And that's your intuition talking to you.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've done it before. It actually works. You lay out 4 main steps for people to follow on this process of reinvention. And I'd love to take our listeners through them. They are search, struggle, stop, and finally, hopefully you get to the solution. Can we take them one by one? Where do you begin searching?
Sure. So the search is actually what I was just describing. So the search, that first step is when you are collecting information, you're collecting experiences. And again, for so many of the people I spoke to, it was not intentional. It wasn't anything like they said, I'm doing this because I want to transition to this different career or transition to this different identity. It was more like it was just happening very organically. And very often people don't know that it will ultimately lead them somewhere else. It could be something, a hobby, a side hustle, a course you're taking, something like that. The next step is this struggle. So the struggle, this is the one we don't like to talk about, but this is where you start to disconnect from your previous identity, but you haven't quite figured out the new one. And it's really uncomfortable. And we feel miserable when we're in it, honestly, which is why we don't talk about it. And generally, when we tell these reinvention stories, we tend to skip over this step. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But generally, this step doesn't end until you reach the third step, which is the stop. So the stop is something that pulls you out of your routine. And that could be something you choose. I quit my job. It could also be something imposed on you. For the people I interviewed, it could have been like a kid going off to college or an illness or a divorce, some sort of life moment or a pandemic, something that pulls you out of your routine. And only then do you get that perspective that you need, that you can synthesize all of those previous experiences and all those thoughts that have been floating around in your head. They can synthesize and give you the perspective you need to understand where you need to go. And that leads you to your fourth step, which is the solution, which is that transition.
I know that you have gotten a huge response to this book. It's doing really well. Congratulations on that. But one of the things that people are really reacting to is this idea of embracing the struggle rather than being made miserable by it or glossing over it or trying to avoid it. What is it about this part of the process that's so necessary?
Yeah, so the struggle is where all the hard work gets done. So the struggle in this period, you feel like you're standing still or that you're stuck. That is where you say when you walk around saying, I'm stuck, I can't figure it out. But the fact is you're moving forward. All of my research points to the fact that this is an incredibly productive time. It's just that you don't realize it. And I call it the Cinderella myth, honestly, because we are brought up on this idea that transformation should happen overnight. It's Cinderella, it's Spider-Man and Superman, it's when we're grown-ups, it's American Idol, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And it kind of teaches us that transformation should happen instantly. And that means that when it doesn't happen for us, we feel bad about ourselves. And what I want to do with next, and this is why I think the response has been so powerful, is to normalize that, to put it out in the open, because so many people right now are feeling that struggle. And I think in the wake of the pandemic and everything we're going through right now, more than ever, people are feeling that, but they're not talking about it. They're talking about it maybe in the privacy of their own homes. But we need to normalize it and get it out there in public and make people understand that it's normal, natural, and that you are going to move forward.
So, what are your favorite strategies for getting through this period of struggle and coming out the other side?
Sure. So I actually have a dozen strategies that I gleaned from all these people I talked to that are very common among pivoters. And I'll just mention a couple of my favorites. So the first I would say is to imagine your possible selves. Now, this is a phrase I'm borrowing from psychologists, but what it means is thinking about who you might be, who you could be, even who you fear you might be. But it's beyond daydreaming. It is imagining, envisioning what would it feel like to be this person? How would others perceive me? And very importantly, what are the steps I would actually have to take to get there? Because it's not simply enough to imagine who you might be. You've got to actually get it outside of your head and take action on it. And that would be another step, which is take action, right? Don't just cogitate. Take a course, shadow someone if you're interested, or do an informational interview if you're interested. So pursue and get outside of your own thoughts, because otherwise you'll be in an endless loop inside your own head. A third step that I would mention, and this is probably my favorite of all of them, is to find your expert companion. Now,
What is that?
The expert companion, I borrowed this phrase from trauma psychologists. I have a whole chapter in next on post-traumatic growth, something a lot of people are not aware of, but we all know about post-traumatic stress after a terrible incident. Post-traumatic growth is to try and help people to go beyond, to bounce forward and grow in positive ways. And one of the ways is to have what is called an expert companion. I think we all need one. What it is, it's a person who knows you, who listens to you, but who reflects back to you your strengths, your talents, your progress. And they don't necessarily tell you what to do, but what they do is they illuminate for you so that you yourself get a much better focus on who you are, where you're going. The reason this is so important, Jean, is because we all have these innate strengths and talents that are so second nature to us that we either don't recognize them at all, or if we do recognize them, we discount them because they come so easily to us that it just seems meaningless.
Do you have an expert companion, and has this person helped you through your life?
Yes, I would say. So you can have more than one expert companion, but my best expert companion is definitely my husband. And I can tell you very quickly how this worked for me was I was at the Wall Street Journal for 22 years. I had a wonderful career. I loved the place. I was given an opportunity, an amazing opportunity to move to Condé Nast to start a brand new business magazine. And I was torn for months. I was literally paralyzed about leave a job I love for a risky job that sounds exciting, right? What to do. And one day I was going over sort of pros and cons with my husband, as usual. He didn't tell me what to do, but what he did say to me was, he said, when I see you talk about your current job, and then I see you talk about this mythical, non-existent magazine that you could create, he said, your entire physical affect changes. He said, you don't see it, but I see your face light up. I see an excitement just in your physical presence that is missing when you talk about your current job. And I was like, oh my God. It was like a mind-blowing moment. But it was also the moment when I realized that I had actually made that decision. And that is when literally I made the decision to go and launch the new magazine.
I totally get it. And by the way, Portfolio was a great magazine. It was really well done, but I get it. I mean, the reason that we launched our Finance Fix coaching program at HerMoney was because my husband said something very similar to me. He said, you get so excited when you talk about the money makeovers that you've done with people over the years, when you actually are helping people move forward, making progress with their own goals of saving more and spending less and paying down debt. And you should do that in real life. And that's
Yes.
what nudged us to launch this coaching program that now we've helped hundreds of people. So it's true. I don't know that I would have recognized that in myself.
And I've heard that from so many other people. Another one of my very quick favorite stories along these lines is Danny Meyer, who we all know as the famous restaurateur, Union Square and Shake Shack, all these fabulous
Yeah.
places. And Danny Meyer told me that he was kind of kicking around as a young man, not really knowing what he wanted to do. So he says, oh, I'll go to law school. And he says the night before he was to take the LSAT, he had dinner with his uncle. And his uncle said to him, why are you going to law school? Ever since I've known you since you were a baby, like all you ever care about is food. And and you love food. And have you ever thought about the restaurant business? And Danny said until that very moment, it never occurred to him that the restaurant business was actually a career. It was just, to him, it was just sort of a passion. He never even thought about it. And as a result, though, of that sort of stray comment, that observation from his uncle who knew him well, he never went to law school. And thank goodness for that, because the rest of us would be a lot worse off if he had been a lawyer instead of a restaurateur.
Absolutely. I was on the West Coast just this weekend. We went to In-N-Out Burger. Nothing compared to Shake Shack. Shake Shack is at the top of my list. But it's interesting. You talk about Danny Meyer. You and I, of course, both women examples. Have you noticed any gender differences in your research about making pivots?
There definitely is a gender differential, and not just a gender differential. I actually have a chapter in the book that's called The Necessity Entrepreneur. And the necessity entrepreneur are people who get pushed off out of mainstream careers. And that tends to be women, people of color, and increasingly actually baby boomers, because they're in or reaching retirement age. And they're getting squeezed out, or they're not getting opportunities any longer. And all of these groups end up very frequently becoming entrepreneurs or having to reinvent their careers because they don't have a choice. But what's fascinating about this is there's two really interesting things about women, because they will virtually all, and the researchers have shown this, women almost all end up having to reinvent their careers for one reason or another. But there's two things. One is that when women lose their jobs versus men, women actually have a stronger self-identity than men do. Men's identities are tied almost exclusively to their job title. For women, we have the same problem as men do, but we have a larger social circle, and we are able to pivot more in order to tap into alternate identities. And I saw this when our beloved magazine portfolio, when it closed after the financial crisis, the men were all like, I have to get another job. And the women, even the breadwinners who were women, were saying, oh, wow, this is a chance for me to spend time with my kids. Or this is a chance for me to go spend time with my mother across the country who I haven't seen. They tapped into identities as parents, as children, as weekend athletes, and in a way that the men did not. So I thought that was very interesting. But also, and this is really fascinating, when women reinvent their careers, they very frequently end up pivoting into something that is very much mission driven, purpose driven. And once you see that, you will see it everywhere. I mean, if you think about someone like Sally Krawcheck, ran 2 investment banks. It was not a female career at all. But what is she doing now? She runs Elevest, which is investing for women, and Elevate, which is a nonprofit to help with women's financial literacy. And I've seen this all over with prominent women and with women you don't know, who you may not know, but some of who you'll meet in Next, who have reinvented their careers in a mission-driven way.
All pivots, or I should say most pivots, require some sort of financing. You've got to either make your money stretch while you're pivoting, or you have to pivot to provide yourself with an income for longer. What do you think are the most important things to look at when you're looking at the numbers?
Yes. Okay. So there's no question that there is a degree of privilege involved in pivoting, and there's a degree of financial stability that is needed. So the most important thing that I tell people first, I say this, I have a whole chapter in the book called Move Before You Move, as in, don't just quit your job, right? Like you can move gradually into your next phase before you actually just wholesale quit. And I think that is incredibly important. Also, you want to have some degree of stability, and it doesn't mean that not everyone can do it. So, for example, one of my very favorite examples of someone who pivoted is a telephone repairman named Chris Donovan. Grew up in a working class family in Boston and got a job at the phone company, because that's what you do, when he was a teenager, and he stayed for many years. And he had this secret hobby that he did not share, which was drawing these very elaborate designs of shoes. And he was just fascinated in an architectural way with these shoe designs that he would draw. But he didn't show them to anyone until he was in his 30s, when he met his now husband. Finally shares these drawings. His husband says, "Oh my gosh, you have actual design talent." And Chris goes through that struggle that we're talking about because you need a job. He needs the financial security of the job. Shoes is not a real job. That's not a thing. And he went through that for a number of years. And when he was 50 years old, finally, he reached his stop moment, which was he was unfortunately diagnosed with cancer, luckily recovered. But when he was diagnosed, he was finally said, you know what, life is too short. And it really led him to pivot. And when he recovered, he took early retirement. And then his husband, they'd been scraping and saving to get a rehab of the kitchen. And his husband gave him that pot and said, take it, go back to school, which he did, and became a shoe designer. Chris Donovan Shoes, you can check him out online. And what I love is Boston Magazine, a couple of years ago, they named him the best new designer. They called him fashion's newest design superstar. And he was 62 years old. So it took him a long time, and there was a financial issue involved, but he got to his dream. And I met a lot of people like that. And I do think finance is important. But again, he did move before he moved. He did a ton of work, those years and years of drawing and honing his own designs.
What I love about this skill set, Joanne, is that it seems like it's a set of skills that once you sort of take it in and understand it, you'll be able to apply 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 3 months from now. It's not a one and done, but it's something that you'll probably lean on again and again. Are you hearing that from the people that have gone through it?
I am. And not only that first of all, recognizing the steps is very helpful. I found it just helpful in thinking about my own career, my own trajectory, because I too, like I think most people, I've been through those periods of time where I'm like, oh my God, where am I going next? What is going on? And it's terrifying. And so understanding the process is really helpful, but also understanding that most of us will probably go through this more than once. And I would imagine that for the younger generations coming up who are looking at this 60-year career path, it's going to happen for them multiple times. But I also can see it in these younger generations because I interviewed people from their 20s through their 90s. And I could see it in the younger people I interviewed that they're very comfortable with this idea. I think for those of us who are a little older, it's a new, novel concept. It's a little scary. And I think that for younger generations coming up, it's something that is coming much more naturally to them and that they expect it. So I do think that you'll go through this multiple times, but knowing the strategies and knowing how that roadmap sort of plays out really takes a lot of the mystery out of it, which is helpful and also helps you to figure out proactively how to move through those stages.
Yeah. Absolutely. So helpful. Joanne, thank you for being with us. And if people would like to learn more about you or about the book, where do they go?
Sure. My website is joannelipman.com, and you can find information about the book, about me. You can contact me and we can get in touch. And to buy next, The Power of Reinvention in Life and Work, you can buy that anywhere, Amazon. But I do always love to encourage people to support their local independent bookstores.
And we will talk to you again, I hope, very soon. This is always fun for me. Thanks so much for being here and for writing it.
Thanks, Jean. Great to be with you. Thank you.